Hey guys, in case you can't tell, we are highly disorganized.
Welcome to the indie author life.
So we just wanted to put together some time to really engage more than anything else, and I know a lot of people in Tucson are aspiring authors, and you know, we've kind of been through the journey, and so just sharing what we can, you know. So I figured we'd introduce ourselves and then mostly just kind of a Q&A session. So I'll start. I'm Brent Miller. I've written and published 14 novels. They're all self-published. Thanks so much. Okay. Yeah, and you know, I've been doing this really more like high effort since 2019. I published first when I was 13 in 2013. That's not right. Whatever. I was 16. Anyway, and after college, I really kind of picked up, and I've, you know, the marketing, like just that whole aspect. And so I'm independently published, and that's kind of my area of expertise, I guess. So anyway, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
I'll jump in. I'm Cole Miller. I'm a voice actor, narrator, and I'm writing a TV series, script for that. So I'm approaching this with character building in a different light, dialogue and world building. So that's something that I have offered with Brent before, and he's helped me with mine as well. We've collaborated, so I wanted to share that perspective with potential future authors out here.
My name is Omar Soussi. This is my first book I published. It took me about 6 years of writing. I self-published it back in May of 2023. I'm working on book 2 for Azul, the same series. We finished the first draft. I'm now currently editing it. I'm not sure if people were able to hear me from the mic. I work as a teacher right now, and before I was a teacher, I also worked as a sports journalist covering ASU and the Suns, Cardinals, all these different sports teams around the valley, working for organizations like Arizona Republic and Forbes. So I kind of like to take my experience as a teacher and journalist and put it into my storytelling, and that's kind of my perspective for today.
My name is Meagan Poetschlag. I have been a published author since 2015, and it's been quite a learning journey. I published this book in 2017, Wolf's Blood, and then this one was just published last September. I classify myself as new adult fantasy author. All my books feature fantasy worlds, and my characters shapeshift and magical things like that. So I guess my books are very character driven, so that's kind of an aspect that I like to use in my writing, is very character driven stories, but what's going to happen to them next kind of a thing. So that's where mine are. My publishers, I'm not published through Kindle Unlimited, which is a really big indie publishing platform. I actually contract with like the small presses. So I have a little bit of a different experience in that aspect if anyone's interested in small presses. This one is published through a local Tucson publisher, and they've been great to work with. So any questions on any of that, I can help you guys out.
Yeah, so, you know, that's a bit about us, and I kind of figure there are a lot of people here, and I could, you know, give you a little bit of a monologue about the publishing process, but I don't know if that would encompass anything that you are here to hear. So we just want to open the floor up to questions and see if you guys have anything to start with.
What's your experience so far self-publishing?
Yeah, so self-publishing has been a joy for me, honestly. My first book was through a hybrid publisher when I was 16. And that's a whole other can of worms, right? Hybrid versus vanity, and I can go into that. But that's what I mean if people are interested, right? But yeah, my newer work is all self-published through KDP, and it's all about pros and cons. So self-publishing gives me the freedom to publish when I want and to kind of do my own hype cycle, to do things like that. The covers that I have on both of these I'm very attached to, and it's like I get to have the freedom over that and over the content. So for me, self-publishing has served my stories very well. The downside of it is marketing. You're a one-man show, right? And that's not entirely true. I have support and my family's incredible, but none of us are marketing experts, right? So you kind of have to learn to put it all together yourself. And then the other thing that I always tell people is if you're looking to make money, that's not how you do it. You know, it's about doing something you love and putting your stories out there. Yeah, I know Omar's also self-published. You have.
Yeah, so I got self-published through Ingram Sparks while I was working on Azul. During the editing process, I was reaching out to agents, sending out a bunch of query letters, trying to get as many hooks out there as possible. And at a certain point, I just decided I don't really, after a couple rejections and no calls or no shows or anything like that, I kind of just decided, like, I want this book published. I don't really care if it gets a lot of people buying it or something like that. I'm really happy with it, I'm proud of it, and I want it out there. And for me, I went with Ingram Sparks because that is what allowed for the book to be physically in stores like Barnes & Noble, Target, stuff like that. And for me personally, that's what I always wanted to have that experience of seeing my book in a physical location, not online, not in Amazon only, but have it physically in the store. That's really something I was looking for. So when I saw Ingram Sparks, and they were also, and I think they're still doing this now, offering people to publish their books for free, I just ran with that, and it was very simple. I'm not here to say like, oh, publishing is a breeze. There is a lot of work into it, but it was very kind of idiot-proof, I would say. It was very easy for me to go in, upload my cover, upload the information, put everything in there, and get it out within, I think I had it set a week after I put it all in to be published, and it was already getting published by that point. So it was very smooth, and I like working with them, and I'm probably gonna keep working with them so long as I remain self-published. And I personally love self-publishing because it's my story, it's my thing, and it's my baby. Like the way I wrote it is how I want it to be viewed by other people. And yeah, obviously I've worked with editors who've told me what they think should be fixed and corrected, and I want to go with that, but at the same time I don't want to cut stuff arbitrarily because my agent or the publication's like, yeah, we need this gone.
I'd actually like to hear more about working with Ingram Sparks. I've used KDP, and layout can be a little bit of an issue, so I'm curious how Ingram Sparks is as far as like uploading, creating your layout, your cover.
Yeah, it was very, they had like specific things to lay out, like what it's gonna look like, what space might get cut, what space might get folded up because of how, especially with hardcover, like how it has the specific borders and everything like that. It was very much like, it tried to help you as much as it could to tell you what you were allowed to do and what's gonna get cut and what isn't gonna get cut. And it was, even with the text, like it was very automated. Like you can put in a specific text that you want and it would just, the whole thing would be that. And I thought it was very, very helpful, and it was very much like, you can be as hands-on as you want, as hands-off as you want. Like it can kind of go both ways. I know there's a lot of authors who have specific views on how they want their books to look like and how they want the text and everything to go. It was very kind of like you can go about it as you see fit, from my perspective at least.
I want to know how your character building process was for each of you. I mean, how did you decide on your characters? How did you build them up, and how did you relay them to the story? If that makes sense.
As far as like characters, I just like things that I'm passionate about. They just kind of influence me so much. And I'm like, okay, my character has to have that trait, and then I just kind of like work it into their personality, and then it's just part of who they are. I've definitely worked on this book for over 10 years before I actually published it, so it definitely takes time sometimes to get them just exactly how you want people to see them in the books. But characters definitely, like with personality and dialogue and things like that, is part of it, but I think a lot of their personality comes from just you and you putting yourself into them too. So for me, a lot of my characters have a little piece of me in them too, and part of my personality, so I can make it more believable and realistic. Or people I know, you know, sometimes that happens, like with villain characters maybe, but.
Yeah, I can go for myself, like the building of characters is always like, it takes a lot of time and effort to think it out and especially think out how do I want the characters to interact with each other, how do I want their thought process to go and everything like that. It's just, for me personally, as I'm writing, it's a lot of, let me just write and see what comes up, and as I'm going, I'm gonna keep working on it. It's kind of like molding clay, like you're kind of building it as you're going, and as you keep putting more and more work into it, you kind of figure out the finer details as you're working. Azul, I've always kind of had like a general idea of her, but as I'm writing and as I'm working the story, I'm like, okay, let's think more details into it. Let's put some more information and kind of think of how that would lead a person into, how would a person react to that. I'm very much, especially since like Azul is like historical fantasy, like it is, I tried to make it set in the 1500s in Europe to try and make it work as much as possible. I felt like none of these characters should be written in a way of like, oh, this is just some trope character. Like I wanted to kind of feel like you're reading an actual real life human's perspective. So it was a lot of work on that front, but I felt like it went really well, especially for the main characters, because like there was a lot of time and effort I put in, and I kind of, like Meagan said here, took from perspective of a lot of different inspirations, whether it's family, friends, myself, or just some obnoxious students I've worked with. But funny enough, one of my students is actually named in the book, and I did not have that kid until last year. So it was like 6 years with that name in there, and then I see him. It's just like crazy.
Yeah, so from my perspective, sorry, I'm not used to microphones, and I'm like, is this, because I don't hear it. So from my perspective, I agree with a lot of what you both said. I have a lot of myself in each character, whether I like that piece of myself or not, right? And then I do think that they kind of come together as the story does. One thing that's helpful for me in the kind of preliminary phase of drafting these characters is making them, almost character sheets.
Yes, I was gonna mention that.
Yeah,
Character
so-
sheets help a lot.
Yeah, I give them, like, this is their biggest dream, their goal in
What's
life.
their favorite thing to eat? What's their
Right.
favorite color?
Your biggest fear. The fear is a big one for me because a lot of us are motivated by what we're afraid of. And so it gives that human aspect of there's a little bit more behind this interaction than just what they're saying, and you kind of have something to drive. But the other thing that I think really matters is quirks. Like
Those are fun.
so like in Cursed, one of my editors was reading it for me, and every time one of the characters, Tyler, when he talks, the main character's name is Garrick Elliott, right? First, last name. 100% of the time, he calls him Garrick Elliott. That's just a quirk. It's something about their friendship, and I feel like that gives them more depth. And it was just a funny anecdote because every single time this editor highlighted it, and she's like, why would you call your friend by their first and last name? And she didn't get what I was going for. Maybe that's on me, right? But
She just didn't understand the vibe.
right? But yeah, there were like 100 times in the book, I think, that she marked it. And I'm like,
So you don't always fix what your editor wants you to fix.
Right.
But it does help to have an editor helping you out,
Right.
giving you little hints here and there.
But I'm interested in your answer from an acting perspective because you really embody these characters too, right?
Yeah. So when I'm writing, it's a little easier because I can start it from what story am I telling, what themes of the story, what's the trajectory, and then a character has to fit someone that would go on that path, and then you add in relationships that they have, friendships, other perspectives that they need to tell that story, and it fully fleshes them out. When I'm acting, all of that stuff is established, and I have to take myself out of that, look at the character, and see, okay, so how did they specifically respond to these things? And then after I fully remove myself and accept what the character, what the authors have told me, I have to put myself back in. Where do I fit in the cracks of this? So this relationship, this character experiences loss. Where have I experienced a similar sort of loss? And use that to flesh out and define, specifically with quirks. And even using a specific example, Tyler says Derek Elliott. Is he overly formal? Is it playful? Is he mocking him? Is it a whole two first names kind of joke? So when you get the chance to really fill that in and use your own perspective on that, it just makes them feel even more fleshed out to me. I don't know, actually, as authors, have any of you ever tried to imagine a conversation between yourself and your lead characters?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
There's not a day that goes by where I'm not thinking these conversations between my characters.
What would this character say if I said this to them or did that to them?
And so it's a similar process, because I do something similar with acting, so you're like, okay, so if I as myself say this, it bounces off of them, they're irritated, they're upset. And then how do I respond to this person being upset? And it just really, I don't know, that imaginary conversation fleshes out all of the quirks underlying behind the character.
One anecdote too. I'm good at running on rabbit holes, but I mentioned that I use the biggest fear, right? But I didn't mention where that came from, and that actually was Cole's idea. And the way that I worked it in is because Cole was reading Cursed, and we have all these big dreams, right? So one day it's going to be a television show, and he's going to be the actor playing Kaylin, and we have all these big dreams. And so he reads it from this perspective of really understanding Kaylin. And he told me it's just like, he seems mean, but when you realize he's motivated by fear. And I was like, what do you mean? And he knew my character better than I did. And that happens sometimes, right? I mean, we're creating more than words on a page.
Well, that's the ultimate goal, is to make someone else fall in love with the character.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And if anyone is to read Cursed and has something to say about Kaylin, find me, Kaylin Lover 44 on Facebook.
How long should you spend, describing a character's and or place's appearance?
Yeah, that's a really good
That's a great question.
There's a lot of different ideas
Different
on
schools
that.
of
Yeah.
thought. I know for me, I don't know, somewhere between not at all and
Whatever's
total.
comfortable for you, to be
Yeah.
honest.
That's the
Because
thing.
it's your own unique voice.
Yes.
Like me, I personally, I'm not a fan of a 3-page description of a rock or a
Right.
window, but there is room for it to be described well and not be too lengthy. So just find your happy medium that works for you. Have a couple friends read it and see what they think about it. Is always helpful.
I think the best way to go about it is try and visualize it yourself and how that visualization works. So for me, I don't try and put too much text down about the visualization of characters or location and stuff like that. I try and focus more on the character interactions with each other.
I actually do not focus on what the characters are wearing at all. I
Yeah.
focus on their personalities.
Right. I feel like it's important, but not as important as
Yeah.
other stuff. So
Unless your story's based on if your character's into fashion or something, then it would make more
Right.
sense for that character to be describing what they're wearing, of course. But
it
depends on the character's personality.
It depends on the character, and I think it also depends on the author too. I know I read Dune over the summer because I love Dune Part 2, and the man wrote as much as he could possibly do. And as I was reading that, I was just like, man, I don't think I'm ever going to get to this level of writing in terms of detail, but it's I can still understand the story beats that he was hitting, even with the 5 pages describing a waterfall underneath the sand. It's just
Well, the interesting thing for me too is I think that if you can visualize it and write what you need to see the picture, that's great advice.
I'm not the best artist, but I do like to try to draw something before I try to write it too, just so I can kind of get a vision of it in my head before I start to describe it with words.
I try and look it up. I will look up.
Yeah.
I'll use Google.
Internet searching is wonderful.
Yeah.
You can get trapped on DeviantArt too,
Yeah,
looking
right.
at photos.
I have aphantasia. I learned recently. If I close my eyes, I can't visualize anything. therefore my descriptions are little, like they're pretty detailed. And I've had people tell me that, and it's like, people are like, oh, it's amazing that you can describe so well without being able to see it. But that's why I have to, right? Because in my head, you're not gonna be able to see this if I don't give you all the details. And that's what I think it really comes down to, is what you both said. It varies, but you do what is right for you and your story. And the other thing I'll say is, like, this is my 2 cents, right? But I wouldn't bother describing things that don't matter, right? So the level of detail you put on it will tell your readers how much they should pay attention.
That is true. How many times that particular item is mentioned in the
Exactly.
story too.
Especially if it's like a point of view of like a first person perspective. Like if the character doesn't care about it as much as, if the character doesn't care, they're not gonna describe it. But if it's something that is very important, they're gonna put a lot of effort into that.
Oh yeah, third person point of view, first person point of view makes a big difference in that too.
Definitely.
And this might be unrelated, but I learned the hard way that kind of applies to characters too. If there's a character who is gonna be in one chapter who, like, their purpose is to move the plot forward for one scene, they might not need a name.
Don't confuse people too much
I
with
learned,
names.
I learned the hard way because of my brother here that people get obsessed with characters that you did not intend to matter.
It's true, you'll find that the people come up to you and they're like, oh, I love this character, and you're like,
Who is
I'm
that?
gonna kill them in the next book, but I'm not gonna say that.
Yeah, I don't know if that. What's that?
Has generative AI had an impact on your writing or your publishing at all? And if not, do you have any thoughts about if it's going to?
I think it hasn't affected me, and from my own perspective, because I do work with students and I tell them, hey, I don't want to see you using AI, I don't want to see you using ChatGPT or anything. I want you physically writing down, if we're doing any homework, you write it down for me. I feel like AI, yeah, it would be kind of foolish of me to sit here and be like, oh, AI has no business in writing or publishing or anything like that, because that is just the way technology is moving forward, and most likely it will have some impact. But for me, I always feel like, as authors and as people who work on stories and characters and stuff like that, it's the thing that really makes these characters great and unique is the heart that's put in and the effort and passion put in. Like, anyone can come up with I feel like any AI can come up with a plot that involves characters killing each other and betraying each other, but really what makes it heartbreaking and makes it powerful is the interactions that the author specifically is putting in to kind of set that up. So I think AI is definitely, like, it can be a good tool to use, but it's something that I would never look at and be like, oh yeah, this is all I'm going to use, and it's just
I know a lot
That's
of
it.
companies now have noticed the impact that people have had from it, and they're starting to check if they're AI or not.
Yeah.
too. So I haven't really felt too much impact from AI either.
I haven't felt, I mean, okay, so this is gonna sound self-deprecating. I'm not at a point in my career where I would notice if AI were taking my my work, right? But I do, I mean, I see the impact in the gaming industry and in things like that, and I have some pretty strong stances about it now, but I'm torn because somebody recommended I use AI for marketing, because I'm terrible at marketing, and they gave me a prompt, and I'm like, that seems like a good idea, but I'm concerned about it, kind of, about people using it for writing. So then, am I a hypocrite if I use it for marketing? And I don't know. I'm torn on that, but I do agree with you. I think that the fear that people have is that it will kind of start to replace a lot of art, and I just don't think that AI will ever have that heart that we have, and so I'm not too concerned about that, but I do think we're in for a couple years of figuring stuff out, at least in the game industry, but maybe in major publishing too, right? Like, we might see that coming through. I know that I've heard a lot of authors, and this one might have impacted me. Fiverr, I got all my covers done on Fiverr, and they're phenomenal. The artists are incredible, and I've heard that it is now being overrun by people using AI art, even if you ask them not to. And so now I'm like wondering with my newer covers, I'm like, wait, are these people lying to me? So I'm like, because I don't want to put something out and then
not know that's
yeah,
it.
well, and have this, I'm giving you this spiel about how AI is wrong, but your cover art's is AI, right? You know that. So, I mean, but that's the only impact I could. Oh, have you guys heard about Kindle, Kindle Weave?
Is it like for voice, like
No,
the
so-
audiobooks?
So Kindle Weave is, maybe I shouldn't be advertising this. There's
It's fine, you already opened.
Right, it's
You already opened
Went there
Pandora's box.
already.
Can't put Pandora back in her box. It was a Cobra Kai reference. I just want to be clear. I know what Pandora's box is. Kindle Weave is this new feature that's coming out on Kindle, and basically what it does is writes your story for you. You tell it, hey, I want to read something about werewolves and vampires, and I want to have romance in it, and it'll write the story. And it trains that AI on Kindle Unlimited books. So
That's crazy.
yeah,
Mine are not unlimited, so
right. but I'm still gonna keep publishing with Kindle Unlimited because it's too convenient. But that, I'd be lying if I said that's not a concern. See how that goes.
I will just put one last thing out there. I feel like if AI is ever going to start taking jobs, like it would have already started at this point. Like with the pandemic, especially, like as someone who worked as a teacher during the pandemic, if online systems and stuff like that, like AI didn't take over teaching jobs at that point, like I don't see how they would in the future when it's like less convenient. So
I have a lot, a lot of my job invites. So I'm out auditioning, and then I get a secondary invite, and it's like, oh yeah, and just make sure you record your lips, pronounce everything very slowly. It's like, oh wait a minute. And there are quite a few. They start off subtle and they kind of trick you, and if you go in the process, a lot of job advice. I'm getting a lot of training AI on your voice, and there is actually, for voice actors, a little bit of legislation against that. They're striking right now to try to increase that and get some rights against that. But right now, as far as audiobook narration or voice acting go at all, there is a lot of people trying to sneak AI programs in there. And that has been pretty damaging to some of the roles I've been trying to take. But I'm working on some stuff right now, so it's not all the doom and gloom. Yeah.
Regarding storylines, did you start with kind of what kind of character that you wanted and then basing the story around it?
Yeah.
Or do you start with an actual storyline and then building the characters up?
Yeah, I see 3 ways to approach.
I think it depends on the author. I like to start with just like a basic idea of a storyline, and then I kind of already know what I want the main character to be, but not fully, just like, oh, I think I want it to be just like a girl from somewhere, and then I want it to end this way, so just like a basic, okay, this is how it's gonna need to end, and then I just kind of go with the character development and then see where it takes the story from that point.
So for me, the whole process of getting Azul was actually, I started working on the prequel before I started working on this book. Like the whole idea I had was completely focused more on like the Aztecs and the Spanish, and then as I was writing it, I kind of realized like I'm not giving the Aztec culture the respect, and like I didn't fully comprehend all the details with it, and I felt like I was kind of not putting as much respect into it, so I felt like it wouldn't have been as good of a story, and I kind of decided to keep parts of it and bring it into Azul. The idea was always Azul was going to be the main character of the next book. Whatever I was going to do with that prequel, Azul was always going to be the focal point. So I had the idea of the main character, but now I had to flesh out everything else that came with it. But I already had kind of some ideas and some background to it. I just now had to figure out what does that go from it. I think with that is, once you have the character, you kind of can, once you have her, what she does, what they do, everything else kind of revolves and
Their
reacts around that.
personality kind of progresses
Exactly,
the story. Yeah.
exactly. What they do kind of like, it's the domino effect.
Yeah, I think that similar, but it's kind of a blend. I think there are a couple ways to approach kind of world building and story crafting, and I'm sure that there are more than I can list, but I can give you 3. Everybody knows character driven and story driven. I like to add world driven because I'm pretentious, but essentially you start somewhere, right? And whether that's, I have this really cool character, what story can I use them in? Or you start with, this is the world, what characters make sense in it? Or this is the story I want to tell, what characters do I need to tell it, and what world do they need to live in, right? And so one of those 3 elements has to speak to you. Yeah. And so like for Powerless, my starting point was the world. I was thinking, okay, what would it be like in a world where everybody has powers, right? And I wanted to tell a dystopia story, so I made that world, and then Carson was the catalyst that kind of told the story I wanted. So Carson came later, whereas Cursed, Garrick came first. It was, I want this guy, I want his journey, I want to see him grow up. And then, you know, he was a werewolf, and with the werewolf story, it's not a typical werewolf story because it's a very character-driven Bildungsroman. And so that happened because I started with him, and everything else was kind of growth from it. And so it really just depends on which piece jumps out, and I think that you fill everything in from there. But I do think it also kind of changes the way the story's told. Like, Cursed is very much what you guys are saying. It's what would make sense for these characters to do, and you know, I have an idea of the end, but I don't know where it's going. Powerless is, this is how it's gonna end. Carson has to be the person who gets there, right? Because this one's more focused on the characters and their journey, and this one's more focused on the story and the themes that I'm trying to convey. They're both valid ways to tell stories, and really any way is a valid way to tell a story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why indie author is so amazing.
Exactly.
You can tell your story however you want to tell it.
And I think it's interesting looking at some of these stories that no matter how it started, whether the author had their story or their character or their world, a lot of times there'll come to be this illusion that everything's happening because the lead characters are pushing it to happen. Because when it's done, like the blend of it can make it really look like the character's choices are starting these things, but really for the author, that was always what was going to happen, and the character was built around that choice. So it's just really interesting to know where you line up, how you like to start your process, and then look at it again and see if it feels like everything is happening naturally, if the world reacts how it should, if the people react how they would.
And then if not, which one do you have to tweak, right? What's the most important part to you? If Carson's reaction doesn't make sense, do I need to change the world to make his reaction make sense, or change my story to make his reaction affect the world how it should, right? And it's just a balancing act of what are you trying to bring across, right?
And I would also say, like, it also depends on like where you want the story to end up, and like how it reads off to you too. Like, if it feels like it's something that's good and like it makes sense and you find it interesting, then by all means, it doesn't need to be perfect. Like, nothing we do is perfect, and if we're shooting for a story that's kind of like trying to mirroring real world and stuff like that, I think having something that's kind of hypocritical or kind of like condescending is like, well, that makes sense. Someone in the real world would do that.
Which do you like better, Grammarly or AutoCrit or something else when you're writing for your final edit?
You guys might have better advice, so I'll
Yes.
go
I
first.
actually don't use any of those. I
Okay.
hire an editor, which is pricey, but I've heard really good things about Grammarly. I've been wanting to try that one, but I haven't tried it yet myself.
I will read my story a couple times before I send it to an editor. I read it
At least 20.
I think I read this like 3 or 4 times before I was just like, I'm ready to get it published and go. I I guess I do autocorrect when I'm on Microsoft
Yeah.
Word. So like I'll see the red squiggly lines or blue squiggly lines below.
But with
And-
fantasy characters, it's hard to have autocorrect be
Yeah.
accurate.
Just
You
add-
make up a lot of words.
add dictionary.
Exactly, I do that a lot.
But I use autocorrect. I don't really use Grammarly, and I will have an editor mostly because what I'm more concerned about is the grammar, because I am not exactly pinpoint accurate with my grammar.
And as you write books, you do get better at the grammar
Yeah.
yourself, but I still recommend having second eyes on it.
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, I
But don't you find a real live editor takes a lot of time?
yes. So that's
It
where
does, it does.
It took
I can jump in because I think that editors are not bad. I don't want to give that impression,
great start.
but they're not as necessary as everybody says they are. And the way I do it, I use Microsoft Word, and I have really I just use their check. I know Grammarly works into it, but when I got a new computer, I lost that and I haven't used it since. But I do a lot of Googling if I'm not sure of the grammar. And then I have my family's amazing and I'm blessed to have them, but I have 5 people, I think, who will read my books for me. None of them are professionals, and that still
I was
takes
gonna
time.
mention that, I would
Yeah.
say, if you
Yeah.
have a community of other author friends or
Right,
anybody,
or- yeah.
just any other pair of eyes always
Yes.
always helps, even if it's not an official editor.
It still takes months.
Yeah,
It
yeah, it still
depends.
takes time, but
It-
patience is our best friend in the indie world.
I will say, I use Reedsy. I can't remember if that's the name for
Oh,
it. Reedsy.
I've been on there for
Yeah.
years before.
Reedsy, it's like REED. Yeah, it's a website where there is editor available for hire. Like you can go in there, send them your stuff, and they do pretty reasonably well on timing. Like the 2 people who edited my book took about a month, and in the grand scheme of things, 2 months within a 6-year journey is not that bad.
Yeah,
No, no.
it's not. And I publish once a year, so I tend to do, unless this year's different, but usually once a year. I'd say about 6 months to write, about 3 months for their first pass, and then 3 months for me to edit it again. So these
I'm
take
not that
time.
efficient.
Um,
Everyone has their own pace.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, and that's the point, right? I mean, that sounds like a long time to me, but it takes time. But it's important for me to just mention that, like, publishing can be very cost prohibitive, right? And there are ways to change that. So like everybody's got a story that they can tell, but we all get in our heads of like, wow, but it's gonna cost, $1,000 and I can't pay for an editor and I'm not saying put something out there that hasn't been looked at, that'll be bad. But like Fiverr cover art, this cost me like $100, and then I don't pay for editing. It's affordable. Like you don't have to break the bank to do your dream, right? That said, if you can afford an editor and you want to, by all means. I'm not going to tell you not to get an editor, but
Question is like when you have like your world building and your character development, do you give your character like the set rules that way they can like limit themselves, or you let the world limit them, or let the world show that they're out beyond that world's limits?
I like power fantasies.
That really depends.
Yeah.
I mean, for my writing in my fantasy world, I definitely want like their magical powers to make sense in the world. So like they wouldn't have like some outlandish powers that didn't make sense with everyone else's powers. But it really depends on the story, I think, whether your character is like the ultimate power or if they're part of the whole system that's going on in the story.
I think it really does depend on the story and the characters and kind of what you're doing. For Azul, I don't have like a set power or anything like that because it doesn't make sense. She doesn't know what the set power is. She doesn't have any of this understanding, and since we're seeing it from her perspective, it's very much opening of her eyes and like kind of she's learning what she can do, and like everything that's happening is kind of like shocking to her. Like she sees a dragon, she doesn't know how strong it is. She doesn't understand the power structures or what the power scaling is, but she just knows like this thing will probably kill me, and I can't do anything about it. And then when she starts finding out she has her own powers, she doesn't really understand how far she can go with it until later on. And even then, it's scratching the surface.
Mine's similar, but that's what I have. Carson follows a very similar journey to that because he has a power that shouldn't exist. It doesn't make sense. It breaks the world's rules. And so he kind of has to go on that discovery journey. Garrick has a lot of rules placed on him, and to avoid spoilers here in case anybody wants to read it, but generally, if I give you a rule, there's a reason, and the reason is because somebody's gonna break it.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's rules for a reason.
Yeah.
It's usually a really interesting.
Typically, authors, when they are putting stuff, there's things they're doing with it.
It's going somewhere.
When you say that, are there any ways that you, like if you don't have magic that can change the shape of a creature or something like that, how do you establish a rule that is actually like, no, this is a rule, this isn't part of the story, versus this is a rule, look at the character's journey to stop it?
I think it, again, depends on the characters. Like, if there's someone in the world that can kind of break those rules, like, it's perfect to introduce them breaking that rule to kind of show, like, hey, there's clearly people that can go beyond what the expectation is. And it kind of sets a more foreboding I can't remember the theme or something like that, like kind of setting the state's atmosphere, yeah. Foreboding atmosphere of like, hey, people can do whatever they want.
For me, like to answer that, again, this is not a hard and fast rule. As I just said, I only give rules to break them. Generally speaking, if I need you to know that something's a rule in the universe, I don't tell you, right?
One of the fun things to discover.
Right. I mean, you're never gonna see. Now I'm trying to think of it. You're never gonna see certain superpowers in Powerless. I'm not gonna, and this is an exaggeration. I'm not gonna give you a list of like these are the powers that can't happen.
Yeah.
Right. You know it's a rule because it doesn't show up. But when I give you the rule of nobody has a power that affects something outside of themselves, that is a rule that is stated very clearly because somebody does, right? So that's kind of my take on it, generally. But I can't think of a single time I've given any type of boundary in the world for it to not be broken. Doesn't mean it's not in there. I just can't think of it. Yeah.
Back to the self-publishing that you do.
Sure.
At what point do you guys start to do copywriting? How do you do it?
Yeah.
And where are you with an editor? Like, are there NDAs involved before it's copyrighted, or is there after?
So copywriting is when I was first starting, I was really concerned about that. So there is one way that's very, if you're concerned, a very safe way. Print out a copy and mail it to yourself. And now,
Sure.
I was also always told email it to yourself too. That way you have a digital copy
Right.
and a physical copy
So I've done
that has a post date on it and stuff.
with all my works. I've registered with the Library of Congress, and then I spoke with somebody, and he's like, "Yeah, that doesn't really."
that's exactly what I was going to say. Is sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, Ingram Sparks has a specific section when you're getting it published and getting it set up, where you can have like a copyright section, and you can just put it in that first page. I was actually trying to look and see where I have it on here, but like literally first page in, I have copyrighted at Omar Soussi. So it's like,
KDP isn't as like templated, but I have that same thing. There's no way that you guys can see it, but
You
same
basically
thing.
can customize your own copyright as
Yeah.
long as it says, the basic things like this belongs to the work of your name and,
Sure.
All you
don't
do-
use it without permission. type
So
of
you
stuff.
do think Library of Congress is
I don't use it.
very
I have
good?
never used it. My publisher
Yeah.
might submit to it, but I've never personally
Yeah.
worried about it.
If you put parentheses with a C in it in Microsoft Word, it gives you a little copyright symbol.
Yes.
That's all you really need.
It's all your unique words, so it's
Yeah.
technically yours already.
It's already copywritten.
Okay.
That's the
And keep your notes
yes.
when you wrote the book.
Sure.
Because if it's ever challenged,
Right.
then that's what'll win.
Yeah.
To show
You're
that
the
you
only one that
developed
could have
the
ever made all those notes
Exactly.
about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, nobody else
There's
could
no
do
nobody
that
else that
other
could have
than
done
you.
that. That's a
Okay.
good point.
Like all your previous editions, all your
Mm-hmm.
chapters
Yeah.
you threw away, all.
Definitely have all.
Yeah, you'll have that history, you'll have everything, so.
And if you happened to start on a work or school computer or a public library, move those documents to a flash drive. Don't tell anyone it was started as your work computer. Keep it all on your own personal.
I do a lot of writing on the work computer, you
Same.
really shouldn't.
I've done that before too and changed
Yeah.
it to my laptop, yeah.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Just in case.
I don't know what point of view each of you write in, but would
First,
you speak, well, I'm a first. But would each of you speak to why you use third person, first
Yeah,
person?
yeah. So I actually have, I always preface my answers with something, and I was gonna say, I have an interesting perspective, I'm full of myself here. I use both, and I personally do not like first person books. So Curse was written third person past, and for me, that just kind of feels like how, bear with me, this is gonna sound pretentious, just feels like how stories should be told. I don't like first person, it takes me out of it, it's weird, right? I wrote Powerless, and I wrote the first chapter in third person, and I read it, and it didn't feel right. So I rewrote it in first person present, and that's what it needed to be. So for Carson, I need you with him. I need you in his head. You're taking this journey with him, and I feel like first person gives you a much closer appreciation of the character. For Cursed, there's more of a focus on, which is kind of weird because this is my character-driven one, but there's more focus on multiple characters and on the world, and it's kind of a broader scope. So I don't want you quite as honed in on Garrick. It's still limited, third person limited, so you only see what's in his head anyway, but it just kind of, it feels a little further back, I guess.
I do first person, and I think I know it's kind of contradicting what you just said. I think it's how it works best as an author, because Azul, if I'm telling it from a perspective looking at the entire globe, it just kind of it kind of limits or branches out too much. I want it to be specifically on her story, her mind, what she's got going on. And with book 2, I have multiple point of views, but they're all from first perspective, because first point of view, because it's, I think, the best way to tell their stories, and it's the best way to get really what is motivating and driving them, because without that, it's very much kind of all over the place when I'm writing, and I think it's better for them to be thinking to themselves in that first person and talking in that first person rather than being any other form.
I kind of have a mix of both. I do write in both. Both of these books are in third person, and I did that because multiple point of views, and because I also wanted to not just have you know what one character is thinking. I kind of want you to have the broad, like, oh, this character is this way because of that, and this character is this way because of that, which you would never know if it's all written in first person.
Yeah.
So I guess it just kind of depends on your story, but I'm working on one in first person right now because it's also fun to know what's going on in their heads too. So it just depends on what you're trying to get across. I enjoy reading both and writing in both.
I would say going into that, like, I think it's good to go first person and not know what people are thinking, because it kind of creates more of that atmosphere of like,
Yeah, you're basically like,
tension,
don't know
yeah.
what's gonna happen
Exactly.
next. I don't know, yeah.
You
So
don't
it just
know.
really depends.
You don't know what plots are coming up, and you're kind of just stuck in one person's head, and it's kind of like, when they know, you know, and I think that's always the best way to go about
So
it.
what I do for like the thoughts of the characters in my third person is I do it in italics.
Yeah.
So
I
you
do
still
that too.
know what's
I
going
do
on
that.
in their head,
Yeah.
but it's not technically in first person. But you still kind of at least get a little bit of like, oh, what are they thinking?
When my character's talking to when Azul's talking to herself, it is in italics,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah,
I
that's.
think, as with basically every answer we've given tonight, and maybe we're not helping, it depends.
Sure, we've made it more
Yeah,
complicated,
we've
but.
really helped. Here's another anecdote from me that Powerless first person, the second book is from a different narrator, and I was able to pull off something really cool that I kind of just ruined, but you know, it's been out for a year and a half, so it's your fault now. But the first chapter, if you just go from Powerless to Boundless, the first chapter feels a little weird because the narrator feels different. You're kind of like, what's going on? But you don't know who it is until the end of that chapter. And that was something really cool that I was able to do because it kind of gives you this perspective and you're kind of wondering the whole time, like, this isn't Carson, is it? Like, who is this? And you know, you can't do that in third person. So it worked really well for Powerless, but yeah, it always comes down to whatever's best for your story, which is true, but I know it kind of muddies the waters.
Yeah, I have come across people like, I won't read a book in third person, or I won't read a book in first person, and I mean,
I've come across both, yeah.
it just really depends on what works best for what you wanna say in your story.
How would you go about switching points of view? Like in a first person perspective?
Well, I usually do it by chapter. So you would say like the chapter, and but in a lot of books I read the way they do it is it's the name of the character under the chapter, so you know, oh, right, okay, I'm going to this character now, and that way you can kind of read it in that character's voice in your head. And then, oh, chapter 2, oh, it's this character. Not that you know who that character is yet, but it has the character's name, so you can kind of get your mind to switch to a different character. So I've seen that done. That's what I do in my first person one right now, but it's mostly based on one character. So, but I do have a couple chapters in another character's point of view.
I would do the chapter, but for book 2, what I have right now, in one of the chapters, the 2 point of view characters are interacting and they are kind of thinking and talking to themselves and stuff like that. I just changed the text, the font to make it so like it signifies to the audience like, okay, this is not Azul talking, this is now someone else talking. It's kind of like swapping it on you to kind of like, I think that's the best way to go about it because it's something jarring, and that jarringness should be like, oh, I'm not in Azul's head anymore, I'm in this guy's head.
For between first and third person point of views and everything, is it usually recommended sticking to one in a book, or could you hop back and forth depending on the situation or what's going on?
So what I've found is, as a reader, it's a little confusing to switch back and forth, but if it can be done. I've seen it done, and I've seen it done pretty well. It just really depends. I personally feel like it's good to stick with one throughout the story. You could do the sequel in a different one because it's a different book, but I think trying to stick with one is usually the best way to go, but I've seen different ways.
It comes down to like, I agree, I personally would stick to one, but I also, rules are made to be broken.
I've read stories that were really good and they had one character's point of view was in third person, and then when they switch to the next character, it's in first person. So it really,
it's whatever serves your story best. If you want to, I will say, from my perspective, I think that there is a general air that you should stick to one. And if you're gonna break general convention, do it for a reason. But I don't think that you should get stuck in your head of like, I can't break this, right? But
I would agree with that. Like, I stuck to first person and I wrote both books in first person, and I don't really see any reason to change that. If I ever do want to go to another person's perspective, I would just, or have it kind of be a bit more broader, I would kind of make it like how I just mentioned with the changing text, because I think it's kind of important to kind of keep consistency.
Sometimes it changes the mindset as you're reading it, and then it switches. It kind of sometimes gets confusing for the readers.
yeah, so just for a time check here, I'm a project manager by day. We are a few minutes past our time, but nobody's coming in after us, so until somebody tells me to leave, I'm gonna be here.
If you guys have questions, we'll still answer them.
I just wanted you guys to know, we're not holding you here. And so our purpose here is to answer questions. I can give out I don't have cards, but if anybody wants to email me or anything.
I've got cards and bookmarks.
But we're all here tomorrow at our booths, or not all.
Well, there.
We're here. So if you want to come talk to us, Omar brought some books that he can sell too. I don't know if we're allowed to, but again, until somebody stops us.
Allegedly.
But I just wanted to give my what's it called? Like
Epilogue?
Administration spiel. But yeah, if there's
Where can we find you guys online?
Yeah, so I'm on KDP.
So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, either Omar K. Soussi, I think on Twitter, or Soussi the second, I'm not exactly sure. Instagram, it should be Omar K. Soussi, but if you just find Azul _book on Twitter or Azul -book on Instagram, you'll find my Twitter and Instagram pages on there too. There's also azulthebook.com, and that's where I'm at.
I didn't think of the question that way. Mine's Brent Miller Books. So BrentMillerBooks.com, on Facebook, Brent Miller Books, Brent M Books on Twitter. So.
And I would just like to add one thing. If you are looking to write, if you're looking to do anything, it may seem very, very challenging in the start. It might seem like it's just overwhelming to begin. But the thing I personally would tell anybody, and I've told people who tell me, oh, I can't write, I can't do this, I suck at this, I don't have, literally just take it one step at a time. Literally set a goal for yourself about writing. I have like a note that I always have on my phone or my watch, just like, make sure you write 500 words a day. Don't always hit that, but I at least have like a goal of wanting to write. And I think as long as you stay consistent with it and you keep working on it, you can be an author. Not you could, you can.
You will.
You will. I quite literally was terrible at writing when I was in 6th and 7th grade, and I did not think I would do anything like this. And it's just, you work on it, you stay with it, it can happen with anyone.